Jason Clark, 34, lived for order. A systems analyst in Seattle, his days revolved around clean code, predictable outcomes, and the quiet hum of logic. His apartment in Capitol Hill, with its neatly organized shelves and minimalist decor, was a sanctuary of structure. He wasn't one for chaos. His job at a tech firm demanded precision, and he thrived in it. Data didn't lie, didn't mislead, didn't betray. It followed rules, and so did he. His wife, Caitlin, was his opposite in every way. At 32, she was a rising star in advertising, a whirlwind of charisma who could sell ice to a glacier. Her world was loud. Client dinners, rooftop networking events, and Instagram posts that glowed with curated charm. Where Jason preferred a quiet night with a book, Caitlin craved the buzz of crowd, her laughter cutting through the noise like a spotlight. Their differences had always been their strength. He anchored her. She pulled him into the world. For 7 years, their marriage felt like a perfect equation, balanced, functional, real. But this summer, something shifted. It was subtle at first, like a hairline crack in a windshield you don't notice until the light hits it just right. Caitlin started staying late at work, her phone buzzing more than usual. She'd brush it off with a smile, saying, "Just client drama," or, "You know how deadlines are." Jason nodded, trusting her, because that's what you do when you've built a life together. But the late nights piled up, and her smiles felt rehearsed, like lines from a script she hadn't fully memorized. One morning in July, Jason noticed her phone was locked with a new password. They'd always shared everything: bank accounts, Netflix profiles, even the code to their front door. Their old password was their wedding date, a small ritual that felt sacred. Now, when he glanced at her screen as it lit up with a text, it stayed blank, demanding a code he didn't know. "Why the change?" he asked casually over coffee, trying to keep his voice light. Caitlin didn't look up from her oatmeal. "Oh, work's been hammering us about security. You know, privacy stuff." It sounded reasonable, but her eyes stayed on her bowl, and Jason felt a pang he couldn't name. The changes kept coming. Caitlin started wearing new perfumes, sharp and floral, replacing the soft vanilla scent he associated with her. Her wardrobe shifted too, gone with the practical blouses and flats, replaced by bold dresses and heels that clicked like a metronome on their hardwood floors. "Trying something new," she'd say with a laugh when he raised an eyebrow. "You always said I should have more fun with my style." Had he said that? He didn't think so, but he let it go. He told himself it was nothing. People evolve. Marriages ebb and flow. Still, the quiet moments stung. Evenings they used to spend curled up on the couch, watching old sci-fi movies, turned into Caitlin tapping away on her phone, her face glowing with a smile she didn't share. When he asked what was so funny, she'd wave it off. "Just work group chat. You wouldn't get it." Jason tried to laugh, but the sound felt hollow. He started noticing how she'd angle her screen away from him, how she'd step into the bedroom to take calls, closing the door softly but firmly. By August, the air in their apartment felt heavy, like the city's summer humidity had seeped into their marriage. Jason threw himself into work, debugging code late into the night, hoping the distraction would dull the growing unease. He wasn't the type to snoop or confront. He hated drama, hated uncertainty, but the cracks were spreading, and he couldn't ignore them anymore. Caitlin was still there, still called him babe, still kissed him goodnight, but it felt like she was performing. The woman he'd married, the one who used to tease him about his terrible dance moves and hold his hand under the table, was slipping away. One night, as they sat across from each other at dinner, Jason watched her scroll through her phone, her lips curling into a soft, private smile. It was the kind of smile she used to give him back when they were dating, when every moment felt like a secret only they shared. Now, it wasn't for him. He set his fork down, his appetite gone. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice tighter than he meant. Caitlin looked up, startled, then flashed a quick smile. "Yeah, just tired. Long day." She stood, cleared her plate, and disappeared into the bedroom. The door clicked shut. Jason sat alone at the table, the silence louder than ever. He didn't know what was happening, not yet, but he knew one thing. The life he thought he had, the one built on trust and routine, was starting to unravel, and he wasn't sure he could stop it. Jason Clark wasn't one for parties. Crowds made him itch, small talk felt like navigating a minefield, and the forced cheer of corporate events was his personal nightmare. So when Caitlin begged him to join her at her company's annual gala, His first instinct was to say no. It's just a bunch of ad execs fake laughing over overpriced wine, he'd grumbled, slouched on her Capitol Hill couch. But Caitlin's eyes softened, her voice dropping to that earnest tone she knew he couldn't resist. Jace, it's a big night for me. I need you there. Please. Against every fiber of his introverted being, he sighed and nodded. He told himself it was for her, that being a good husband meant showing up, even when he'd rather debug code in silence. The Gala was at a swanky downtown Seattle venue. All glass walls and polished marble, the kind of place that screamed money. Chandeliers glittered overhead. A jazz quartet fought to be heard over the clink of glasses, and the air smelled faintly of citrus and ambition. Jason felt out of place in the tailored navy suit Caitlin had picked out, the sleeve just tight enough to remind him he wasn't built for this. She'd said it made him look sharp. He felt like a prop in someone else's story. Caitlin, though, was in her element. Her emerald dress hugged her curves, her hair swept up in a way that caught the light. She moved through the room like she owned it, her laugh ringing out as she greeted colleagues with hugs and witty one-liners. Jason trailed behind, clutching a glass of club soda, scanning for the nearest exit. For the first half hour, he lingered near a display of artisanal cheeses, pretending to study the labels while dodging small talk. Caitlin flitted from group to group, her charm a magnet that pulled people in. He watched her half proud, half uneasy. She hadn't glanced his way since they arrived, but he brushed it off. This was her world, not his. Then came Nate. Jason had met him once before, a tall, polished guy in his late 30s, always in a blazer, always grinning like he knew something you didn't. Nate was Caitlin's project lead, the kind of guy who called everyone buddy and oozed confidence. Jason didn't like him, but he'd never had a reason to say why. Until now. Nate sauntered over, a whiskey in hand, his smirk wider than usual. Jason, man of the hour, he said, loud enough to draw eyes. We were just saying Caitlin's so good, she could replace my assistant and my girlfriend in one go. Run my whole life better than either of them. He laughed, a sharp, performative bark, and a few nearby guests chuckled awkwardly. The words landed like a punch. Jason's grip tightened on his glass, his jaw clenching. It wasn't just a joke, it was the way Nate said it, like Caitlin was a prize he'd already won. Jason leaned in, keeping his voice low but firm. That's out of line. He didn't yell, didn't make a scene. He just said it because someone had to. Because he thought, foolishly, that Caitlin would have his back. But she didn't. Caitlin spun toward him, her eyes flashing with something he'd never seen before. Not embarrassment, not gratitude, but anger. Jason, stop it, she snapped, her voice cutting through the hum of the room. You're embarrassing me. The words hit harder than Nate's joke. Conversations around them faltered, heads turned, then quickly looked away. The quartet played on, oblivious, but for a moment, it felt like the room held its breath. Jason stood frozen, his untouched soda sweating in his hand, while his wife publicly scolded him for defending her. Like he was the problem. Nate, ever the opportunist, jumped in with a grin. Hey, no harm meant, buddy. Just a joke. He clapped Jason's shoulder too hard, and the crowd laughed again. This time with relief, eager to move on. Caitlin laughed too, her head tilting back, her eyes crinkling in that genuine way Jason used to love. But it wasn't for him. It was for Nate, for the room, for everyone but her husband. She waved off the tension with a breezy, he's just not used to these things, and turned back to her colleagues, leaving Jason stranded in the moment. He retreated to the edge of the room, his face burning. He wanted to leave, to slip out and breathe the cool night air, but his feet wouldn't move. Instead, he watched Caitlin lean in when Nate spoke, her hand brushing his arm as she laughed at something he said. Watch how she stood just a little too close during a group photo, her shoulder grazing his. It was subtle, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. But Jason was looking, and what he saw wasn't his imagination. It was a crack in his world, widening with every smile she gave away. The rest of the night blurred. Caitlin worked the room, never checking on him. He stayed until the speeches ended, until the crowd thinned, because he didn't want to be the guy who bailed early. On the drive home, she chattered about the event, the turnout, the keynote, how Nate's pitch about disruptive branding had everyone buzzing. Jason stared out the window, the city lights streaking past, and murmured agreement when he had to. She didn't notice his silence. Or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. Either way, it didn't matter. That night, as he lay awake in their bed, her steady breathing beside him, Jason couldn't shake the image of her defending Nate, of her choosing someone else's comfort over his. It wasn't just a moment. It was a fracture, sharp and irreversible. And deep down, he knew it was only the beginning. The gala had changed everything for Jason Clark. The sting of Caitlin's public rebuke lingered like a bruise, tender and impossible to ignore. He tried to push it down, to chalk it up to a bad night, but the unease that had been simmering in their Seattle apartment now boiled over. Jason wasn't confrontational. He preferred logic, evidence, solutions. But logic couldn't explain Caitlin's sharp words or the way she'd laughed with Nate, her hand grazing his arm like it belonged there. So he started watching. Not out of paranoia, he told himself, but out of necessity. He needed to understand what was happening to his marriage. The signs were small at first, easy to dismiss if you weren't looking. Caitlin's phone, once an open book, stayed locked, its screen dark unless she was alone. She'd started taking calls in the bathroom, the faint murmur of her voice seeping through the door. "Just work," she'd say when Jason asked, her smile too quick, too practiced. Her wardrobe continued its transformation. Bright wrap dresses, delicate necklaces, heels that made her walk with a confidence that felt foreign. She'd twirl in front of the mirror, asking, "What do you think?" Jason would nod, but the words "who are you dressing for?" burned in his throat. Her new perfume, a bold jasmine scent, clung to the air, erasing the soft vanilla he'd once associated with her. The old one was boring, she'd said with a shrug. He didn't argue, but each change felt like a piece of her slipping away. Then came the trips. Caitlin's job in advertising had always been demanding, but travel was rare. Suddenly, she was booking last-minute client meetings in San Francisco, flying out for days at a time. "It's just the new campaign," she explained, packing a suitcase with outfits Jason had never seen. Big opportunity. The first trip was in late August, a 4-day stint for a strategy summit. She left on a Wednesday, her goodbye kiss brief and distracted. When Jason picked her up from Seattle-Tacoma Airport that Sunday, he noticed her hair was different, looser, with soft curls she hadn't had before. "You changed your style again?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. She glanced out the window. "Yeah, it just felt like it." Her voice was casual, but her fingers tightened around her phone. Jason tried to stay rational. People change, careers evolve, but the trips kept coming, once, then twice a month, always to San Francisco, always alone. He'd lie awake at night, the glow of his laptop screen casting shadows as he scrolled through her company's website, looking for clues. No mention of a San Francisco office, no public events matching her dates. He hated himself for it, for doubting her, but the pieces didn't fit. One evening, he found a receipt in her purse. $78 at a wine bar in the Mission District, dated the night she'd said she was stuck in meetings. He stared at it, his chest tight, then slipped it back before she noticed. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in September. Caitlin had texted that she'd be late, citing a team dinner after a client pitch. Jason, restless and unable to focus on work, decided to clear his head with a walk. He wandered downtown, the drizzle soaking his jacket, and found himself near Pike Place Market. That's when he saw her car, parked outside a cozy restaurant with string lights and fogged-up windows. His stomach dropped. He told himself it was a coincidence, that she was probably with colleagues. But as he approached, he saw her through the glass, sitting at a corner table, her face lit by candlelight. Across from her was Nate, his blazer slung over the chair, his hand resting on hers. They were laughing, their heads close, oblivious to the world. Then Caitlin leaned in and kissed him. Not a fleeting peck, but a slow, deliberate kiss that spoke of familiarity, of routine. Jason froze, the rain dripping down his neck. His pulse pounded, but his body wouldn't move. It wasn't shock. It was clarity, sharp and brutal. This wasn't a mistake, a moment of weakness. This was a betrayal that had been growing for months, hidden behind passwords and perfume and work trips. He fumbled for his phone, hands trembling, and snapped a photo through the window. Then another, zooming in on their intertwined hands, on the way Caitlin's eyes crinkled as she smiled at Nate. He hated himself for it, for turning into someone who spied on his wife, but he needed proof. He needed something tangible to hold onto, when the denial came, because he knew it would. He didn't confront her that night. He walked home, the rain masking the tears he didn't realize were falling. When Caitlin got back at 11 p.m., she smelled of wine and that damn jasmine perfume. "Good dinner?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "Yeah, just the usual client schmooze," she said, kicking off her heels. She didn't look at him, didn't notice the way his hands shook as he poured a glass of water. He nodded, said nothing, and went to bed. But sleep didn't come. He lay there, replaying the kiss, the laugh, the casual ease of their intimacy. It wasn't just that she'd cheated. It was that she'd built a separate life, one where he didn't exist. By morning, Jason knew he couldn't unsee it. The photos were saved in a hidden folder on his phone, a digital wound he couldn't stop touching. He went to work, wrote code, smiled at colleagues, but his mind was elsewhere. Caitlin texted him a heart emoji at noon, like nothing had happened. He stared at it, wondering how she could live so effortlessly in two worlds. The woman he'd married, the one who'd once cried during his proposal on a quiet beach, was gone. In her place was a stranger who kissed another man in a candlelit restaurant, who lied with a smile. And for the first time in his life, Jason didn't know what to do next. Jason Clark had always been a man of reason, someone who solved problems with logic and precision. But the image of Caitlin kissing Nate in that candlelit restaurant wasn't a bug he could debug or a system he could reboot. It was a wound, raw, and unrelenting that pulsed with every heartbeat. 4 days after that rainy night, Jason moved through his life like a ghost. He went to work, nodded through meetings, and wrote code that somehow still compiled. At home, he and Caitlin coexisted in their Capitol Hill apartment, two strangers sharing a space. She'd chatter about her day, oblivious to the weight of his silence, while he watched her, searching for cracks in her facade. But Caitlin was a master of performance. Her smiles were flawless, her lies seamless. And that made the truth hurt even more. Jason didn't confront her. The thought of a shouting match, of her tears or denials, felt like a trap. He didn't want her apologies or her excuses. He wanted clarity, control, something to anchor him in the chaos of her betrayal. So he waited, and he planned. The photos on his phone, those damning snapshots of Caitlin and Nate, were his leverage. He knew her company had a strict no fraternization policy, buried in the employee handbook she'd once laughed about. "They act like we're all sneaking around like teenagers," she'd said. Now, the irony wasn't lost on him. If he sent those photos to HR, it wouldn't just expose her, it could end her career. The thought was both terrifying and intoxicating. He spent nights researching, hunched over his laptop in the guest room, the door locked. Caitlin thought he was working late. He let her believe it. He read up on the company's code of conduct, scoured Reddit threads about workplace affairs, even looked into Washington state divorce laws. The more he learned, the clearer his path became. He wouldn't scream or beg. He'd act with the same precision he brought to his job, dismantling the lies she'd built with surgical accuracy. But first, he had to face the moral weight of his plan. Was he punishing her out of justice or spite? Would destroying her career make him whole again, or just drag him into the same darkness she'd chosen? The questions gnawed at him, keeping him awake as the Seattle skyline glowed beyond his window. One night, he sat at the kitchen table, the photos open on his laptop. Caitlin was out, another team meeting that reeked of jasmine perfume when she returned. He stared at the images, her hand in Nate's, her lips on his, the easy intimacy that screamed months of deception. His chest tightened, but not with sadness, with resolve. He opened a new email account, anonymous and untraceable, and drafted a message to Caitlin's boss in HR. "Violation of company policy," he typed in the subject line. The body was brief. Attached are photos documenting an inappropriate relationship between two senior employees, Caitlin Reynolds and Nate Harper, in violation of her no fraternization policy. He attached the photos, his cursor hovering over the send button. His heart raced. This wasn't just about her. It was about Nate too, the smirking opportunist who'd made a joke of Jason's marriage at the Gala. They'd both face consequences. But then he stopped. He closed the laptop and leaned back, his breath shallow. What if she lost everything? Her job, her reputation, her future? He pictured her tearful, broken, pleading for forgiveness. Would he feel vindicated, or would he hate himself for stooping to her level? He wasn't a vengeful person. He'd never been. Yet the betrayal had rewritten something in him, sharpened his edges. He thought of the years he'd trusted her, the quiet moments they'd shared, the promises they'd made on a windswept beach. And he thought of her laughter at that restaurant, how it wasn't for him. By dawn, he'd made his choice. He reopened the laptop, checked the email one last time, and hit send. The confirmation ping felt like a gunshot. The next step was leaving. He couldn't stay in their apartment, surrounded by her perfume and her lies. He packed a duffel bag with clothes, his laptop, and a few essentials, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd already checked out. He left his wedding ring on the nightstand, its silver glint a silent accusation. It felt dramatic, but necessary, a line in the sand. He didn't leave a note. Caitlin didn't deserve an explanation. Not yet. He drove to his friend Mike's place in Fremont, a small house with a spare room and a view of the canal. Mike, a graphic designer who'd known Jason since college, didn't ask questions. "Crash as long as you need," he said, handing Jason a beer. Jason nodded, grateful for the silence. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of control. But it came with a cost. As he lay on Mike's lumpy guest bed, staring at the ceiling, doubt crept in. Had he gone too far? The email was sent, the photos were out there, and there was no undoing it. He imagined Caitlin opening an HR summons, her face paling as she realized the truth was exposed. He imagined Nate scrambling to save his own skin. Part of him wanted them to suffer, to feel the weight of their choices. But another part, the part that still remembered loving her, wondered if he just burned down the last bridge to who he used to be. The waiting was the hardest part. He didn't know when or if the company would act. He didn't know if Caitlin suspected him, if she'd confront him, if she'd even care. He blocked her number, not out of anger, but self-preservation. He needed space to rebuild, to figure out who he was without her. Days passed in a blur of work and quiet evenings at Mike's, where he'd sit on the porch, watching the boats drift by. He didn't feel free, not yet, but he felt something new, resolve. Whatever came next, he'd face it on his terms. Caitlin had made her choice. Now he was making his. Jason Clark had set the wheels in motion, and now he waited. The anonymous email with photos of Caitlin and Nate's affair was out there, sent to her company's HR and her boss, a ticking bomb he couldn't defuse. He'd moved out of their Capitol Hill apartment, leaving behind his wedding ring and the life he'd known. At his friend Mike's house in Fremont, Seattle, Jason was a guest in his own existence, sleeping on a creaky mattress, eating takeout, and trying to piece himself back together. He didn't feel triumphant. Sending the email wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the truth. But the silence that followed was deafening, and he wondered if he'd done the right thing or just deepened his own wounds. 5 days after the email, the first ripple came. Mike, scrolling through LinkedIn, showed Jason a post from a mutual acquaintance who worked at Caitlin's firm. Big shake-up at the agency. It read vague but pointed. Jason's heart thudded, but he didn't dig further. He didn't need to. The next day, a former colleague of Caitlin's texted him a screenshot of an internal memo. Caitlin Reynolds is no longer with the company. Please direct inquiries to her supervisor. No farewell, no explanation, just gone. Jason stared at the message, his coffee going cold. It was real. The photos had worked. Caitlin's career, the one she'd built on charm and ambition, had crumbled under the weight of her choices. Then came the fallout. Caitlin didn't call. Jason had blocked her, but she reached out through others. His sister got a tearful voicemail, confused and asking why Jason had abandoned her. A mutual friend messaged, saying Caitlin was telling people he'd left without warning, painting him as unstable, her as the victim. It stung, but Jason didn't correct them. Let her spin her story. He knew the truth. He'd seen her kiss Nate, seen the ease of their betrayal. The photos on his phone, still tucked in a hidden folder, were his anchor, proof that he wasn't crazy, that he hadn't imagined the fracture in his marriage. A week later, she showed up. It was a gray October evening, the kind where the Seattle drizzle clings to everything. Jason was on Mike's porch, nursing a beer he hadn't touched when a knock came. Mike answered, his face tightening as he glanced back at Jason. "It's her," he mouthed. Jason nodded, steeling himself. Caitlin stepped into the entryway, looking like a shadow of the woman he'd married. Her hair was limp, her mascara smudged, her coat soaked through. She looked broken, not in a theatrical way, but in the quiet, hollow way of someone who'd lost everything. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small. Mike hesitated, then left them alone. They stood in the cramped living room, the hum of a distant TV the only sound. Caitlin spoke first, her words spilling out like a dam breaking. "You ruined me, Jason," she said, her eyes red. "I lost my job. Nate won't talk to me. He blocked me, disappeared like I was nothing." She choked on the words, as if Nate's rejection was the real tragedy, not the affair, not the lies she'd fed Jason for months. "I just wanted to feel something again," she whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Jason blinked, stunned by her audacity. She wasn't apologizing for betraying him. She was mourning the collapse of her fantasy. "You think I did this to punish you?" he said, his voice steady but cold. "I left because you broke us. You chose him." She flinched, staring at the floor. Then it all came out. She admitted the affair had started months ago, sparked by late-night work sessions and Nate's flattery. She convinced herself it was harmless, then necessary, then inevitable. But when whispers of the affair reached the office, fueled by Jason's email, Nate cut her off. He took a leave of absence, dodging the fallout, leaving Caitlin to face HR alone. "He said he loved me," she murmured, almost to herself. "And you believed him," Jason replied. She looked up, tears streaming, but he felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just emptiness. She stayed for 10 minutes, asking questions he didn't answer. "Where are you living? Do you hate me? Is there any chance we can fix this?" Each word felt like a plea for absolution. But Jason was done giving her pieces of himself. When she realized he wouldn't budge, she turned to leave, pausing at the door. "This hurts me too, you know," she said, her voice breaking. He didn't respond. After she was gone, Mike poured 2 whiskeys and slid one across the table. "You okay?" he asked. Jason nodded, but he wasn't sure. He felt unmoored, like a program running without a purpose. The next week, Jason made a decision. Seattle was too heavy with memories. Their apartment, their coffee shop, the park where they'd once planned a future. He applied for jobs in Portland, a city close enough to feel familiar, but far enough to start fresh. A tech startup offered him a contract role, and he took it without hesitation. He leased a small apartment with bare walls and big windows, filling it with secondhand furniture and the faint hope of a new beginning. He joined a hiking group, started taking photos again, a hobby he'd abandoned after marriage. Slowly, the weight lifted, not all at once, but in moments. A sunrise over the Willamette River, a stranger's laugh at a bar, a quiet night where he didn't check his phone for her texts. Caitlin sent one last message months later from a new number. It was long, rambling. She'd found a job in a smaller agency, was working on herself, still thought of him. "I'm sorry for everything," she wrote. "I hope you're okay." He read it once, then deleted it. Closure wasn't her apology or her regret. Closure was the life he was building, step by painful step, without her. He kept the photos, printed and tucked in a drawer, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. Trust your instincts, because people don't always show you who they are until it's too late. Caitlin and Nate had faced their consequences, but Jason's victory wasn't their downfall. It was his own rebirth, a life where he chose himself.